Race talk. You've probably all been in a conversation at home, at work, in your neighborhood that was a little awkward or a little unsettling. And whether you left that conversation feeling energized or beat down, either way, there's a lot that's probably going on under the surface. And so what we're going to do is dive in the water a little bit, get down under the surface and see what some of that stuff is and how we can deal with it productively. And before that, a few table setters, and forgive me if this is a repeat for any of you, but we have a couple of working definitions. Racism, sometimes people think of it as throwing around the N-word or having a bad attitude in our heads or saying something mean. It's actually so much more. It's an entire system of oppression that was originally built to justify slavery and all of the economic and political and social hierarchies that came along with that, on the false belief that white people were at the top of the hierarchy and that everybody else was somewhere below. And one of the things that's so important to understand about racism is that complexity. And it's also really helpful to ask yourself, well, what is the opposite? What is racial justice, and what does racial justice look like? And so when you ask that question, there are also a couple of things to debunk. It's not just about diversity and inclusion, although those are important and they are necessary. It's not just about treating everybody the same. It is about really being proactive in creating and enforcing the practices and policies, the kind of actions and the attitudes that create access to resources and opportunities for everyone, regardless of their race, to have the quality of life. And it's not just theoretical access, like on paper everybody could have this. It's also very practical, because racial justice looks like the day when we cannot predict outcomes on health and well-being and all those other things on the basis of race. Sadly, we're not anywhere near that at the moment, but that's what we're aiming for. And part of what's so interesting about race talk is that it goes to the heart of who we are as people. It asks us to reconsider who we are and to really confront the idea that we might not understand how the world works or our place in it as well as we had thought. So for white people, there is an open invitation to explore the racial advantages or privileges that are built into your lives. And not that you asked for them, not that you're out pursuing them, but they're there. And for people of color, there's an invitation to explore and heal from just how much we have internalized the negative messages, the idea that we should be at the bottom of a hierarchy in some ways. And so while race talk is about history, it is about current reality, it is about future plans, it is also deeply about the care and feeding of the human spirit. And that kind of care goes well beyond kind words, active listening, and even trying to alleviate the suffering of individuals. It goes towards the root of undoing the things that cause the suffering. That kind of love is what we call the love that does justice. And that kind of love is how we need to step into race talk, motivated by that kind of love and carrying that forward in all that we do. And so think about the last human or natural disaster that really moved you in some way. Now ask yourself, what if my mother had been there, or my cousin, or my neighbor, or my friend? How different might your motivation to do something have been? How urgently would you be looking for solutions? How long would your attention span have been? You'd have been carrying that love that does justice to make something happen. And that's the level of intensity we need to carry into race talk. And in that moment, then racism is no longer an abstraction. It's not 6 million young people who can't find their way into the labor force, or 40% more of this than that. It's about people I know and love, and people for whom I cannot stand idly by and watch them suffer. The love that does justice is the greatest force we have for pursuing racial justice, that kind of love. And once we've kind of got that and it's got a grip on us, then what? What do we do? So there are some things at the micro level and at the macro level that can put our race talk in motion in a way that will really make a difference. So I'm going to offer you 3 things at the micro level we can do, and then 3 things at the macro level, and then we'll be good. But what I mean by micro is what goes on in our own heads and hearts and minds, and what goes on in our interactions with individual people. So we are living in a visual and a verbal environment that is constantly promoting the messages of that hierarchy. You've heard of the term the black sheep of the family, perhaps? That's the one with bad character, right? You've heard of blacklisting? That's about being ostracized. You've heard about white lies? Those are the ones that are not so harmful. Those are the okay lies. Or the white hats. Those are the good guys, except if you watch Scandal, in which case those are really not some good guys. But you get the idea. There's this language we have that seeps in. If you watch TV or movies, you're going to see more black, brown, and Asian criminals than anything like the actual proportion in the real world. And it gives that message that these are dangerous people we have to look out for. Now, I could go on. There are tons and tons of examples, and I would encourage you all to be on the lookout for them, because once you start looking, you won't be able to unsee, and that'll be a good thing. But here's the thing about these messages. They create unconscious bias, and studies show that even for people who don't have a conscious bias, don't have an attitude that we hold on to, when we make decisions that require a judgment call, whether we're police or judges or doctors or lawyers or any of those kind of folk, maybe all of us, our unconscious bias drives our conscious decision-making, drives worse outcomes for people of color. And the good news in all of this is that we're not stuck with that. 3 things we can do at this micro level that will undo the biases. And one of them is social contact. If we are in relationship with folk around meaningful work and play where there's peer-to-peer relationships, bias is reduced. When we take accountability for our own mistakes, bias is reduced. And when we take the position of others, pretty much every spiritual tradition teaches this, and we stop saying, it's not deep because I'm not drowning, and we start believing the person who says, well, it's deep over here, and I am drowning. And we stop blaming that person for their condition, and we start asking, what are the conditions that lead to that part of the pool, that part of the lake being deeper and harder to navigate? And that is the bridge to the macro. So at the micro level again, we've got social contact, we've got accountability, and we've got taking the other perspective. 3 things you can do to kind of work your race talk into someplace very productive. Now, on the macro side, we can ask some very pointed questions about what goes on in our communities, in our organizations, in our companies. And again, the magic 3. 3 things that we can do there at the macro level. One of them is to challenge the concept of what's normal. Norms are invisible, and people are measured against them, and we can push the assumptions about what's the right thing to do, what's the standard thing to do, what's the non-standard thing to do. We can invite people who are affected by racism into our decision-making and into conversations about the effectiveness of what we're doing and the impact it has on them. And then thirdly, we can level the playing field. So there's any number of public policies and private actions that actually create a very unlevel playing field. So public policies like Indian removal and like urban renewal and redlining have created a massive racial wealth gap. So everybody who's working to catch up has got a massive tilt to deal with on the playing field. And the same thing is true in our companies when we do things like hire from within without letting anybody know there's an opening, or go to our preferred vendor list without trying to check in with the small minority or women-owned businesses in our community. So there's a lot we can do at the macro level, as well as the micro level. And when we glue that together with love, we are going to find ourselves in a human community where there's a place for everyone, and we can all make our best contribution to the really serious challenges and opportunities that are in front of us. We're carrying on a tradition that's been going on for generations. And in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois famously wrote that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Let's make the 21st century the century where love erased the color line. Thank you.